Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But first, President Trump's former lawyer has admitted lying to Congress over the investigation into collusion with Russia. Michael Cohen, who was the president's personal attorney, lied about plans to build a Trump Tower in Moscow during the 2016 presidential campaign. Well, today, President Trump called Cohen a weak person who was just trying to get a lighter court sentence. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore has the latest.
Michael Cohen is Trump's former lawyer and chief fixer, and today emerged from court having admitted lying to Congress.
Mr. Cohen has cooperated. Mr. Cohen will continue to cooperate.
Cooperating, that is, with Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller in his investigation of Donald Trump and the alleged collusion with Russia. It now appears that Trump was negotiating the construction of a skyscraper in Moscow even during his presidential bid. Did that give the Kremlin leverage over the candidate?
Mr. President, your reaction?
The president said that the Moscow deal that never materialized was of no significance. And he had this to say of Cohen, the man often called the keeper of Trump's secrets.
He was given a fairly long jail sentence, and he's a weak person. And by being weak, unlike other people that you watch, he's a weak person, and what he's trying to do is get a reduced sentence. So he's lying about a project that everybody knew about. I mean, we were very open with it.
Robert Mueller's work is shrouded in secrecy, but Trump's allies fear he's getting ever closer to the Oval Office. The president certainly appears worried, yesterday retweeting this meme showing his critics behind bars, including Obama, Hillary and Bill Clinton, and Mueller himself. Already, Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, is facing many years in jail for financial crimes. And there is mounting speculation about further charges against key players in the White House. Trump has now departed for Argentina, in the last hour cancelling a meeting with President Putin that was due to take place there on the margins of the G20 summit. The combination of Mueller's relentless progress and the Democrats winning control of the House almost certainly means an acceleration now of investigations into Trump, potentially leading to a political and constitutional showdown next year. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
In a Manhattan courtroom, another element in the investigation into the contact between the Kremlin and the 2016 Trump campaign team has emerged. The president's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, has reappeared on the scene and pleaded guilty to lying to Congress. He now admits he continued negotiations into a potential Trump Tower real estate deal in Moscow far further into the 2016 presidential campaign than he originally said. Danny Isdale has the latest from Washington, D.C.
Maybe the Mueller drama is nearing its final season, when the time comes for major characters to return, thrust back on the scene in surprise plot twists. If you thought you'd seen the back of Michael Cohen, think again.
Mr. Cohen has cooperated. Mr. Cohen will continue to cooperate.
Mr. Cohen, how are you feeling?
He'd had his day in court in August, pleading guilty to tax crimes and breaking campaign finance laws. Now, Donald Trump's former longtime personal lawyer has pleaded guilty again.
Michael, how are you feeling today?
This time admitting he lied to Congress about a proposed deal to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, talks carried out during the 2016 presidential campaign.
I didn't do the project. I decided not to do the project, so I didn't do it. So we're not...
Over the spin of Marine One's rotor blades, the president paused on his way to meet world leaders at the G20 summit in Argentina to tear to shreds a man he hired and trusted to deal with his most personal matters for years.
What he's trying to do, because he's a weak person and not a very smart person, he's got himself a big prison sentence, and he's trying to get a much lesser prison sentence by making up a story.
Deal or no deal, it matters. Special counsel Robert Mueller has been focusing on this particular real estate opportunity in his investigation into whether the Trump campaign conspired with Russians. A deal...
I decided not to do it.
But if he had...
There would be nothing wrong if I did do it. I was running my business while I was campaigning. There was a good chance that I wouldn't have won. in which case I would have gone back into the business. And why should I lose lots of opportunities?
Donald Trump isn't a businessman now. He's a president, and Michael Cohen isn't his paid personal lawyer and fixer. He's a convicted criminal helping Mueller's investigators. Where before he gave evidence to the Senate Intelligence Committee playing down his negotiations with the Kremlin over the Moscow project, now he's revealed he did engage in those negotiations into the 2016 campaign and discussed them with Mr. Trump and his family.
There seems to be a trend here amongst so many of the president's closest allies that they don't tell the truth, although you've also got a White House that seems on a daily basis not to have its facts straight.
The president has been raging about the Russia investigation lately more loudly than usual. When will this illegal Joseph McCarthy-style witch hunt, he tweeted, one that's shattered so many innocent lives, ever end? Or will it just go on forever? But the Donald Trump downdraft hasn't blown Mueller off course yet. And to those seeking to protect and defend the special counsel's work, this latest Michael Cohen confession is exactly the kind of reason why it's so important he be left alone to carry on investigating unimpeded.
Well, Democrats on the Hill are pouncing on this, unsurprisingly, saying there's a culture of corruption around Donald Trump's inner circle and that this proves it. They've used it to renew their calls to protect further in law the Mueller investigation. So what an interesting juncture in this saga we've reached. You've got the Dems saying that never before has the investigation been in such peril of being impeded. At the same time, we've got these dramatic developments from Michael Cohen, not just what he said about moving the timeline window of discussions about this real estate deal firmly into the 2016 presidential campaign, but also that he's been having these interviews with Robert Mueller's investigators. So the crucial thing is, what has he said and how does it fit into what Mueller already knows? Remember, he has submitted answers from the president already. What has he said about this particular topic? Now, that is all interesting for Donald Trump to ponder as he flies to the G20 in Argentina. On board Air Force One, he has tweeted that he will not be meeting President Putin on the sidelines of that summit. He says it's because of the Ukraine-Russia sea dispute, but it will not be going ahead, he says, in the best interests of all the parties involved.
Danny Eisdale reporting now from Washington. Now, we hope to speak in a moment or two to Harvard Law School's Emeritus Professor Alan Dershowitz, a long-time defender of President Trump. Well, now back to our main story, the latest developments in the investigation into Russian involvement in Donald Trump's 2016 election campaign. Joining us now is the Harvard Law School's Emeritus Professor Alan Dershowitz, a long-time ally of President Trump. Professor Dershowitz, when the president's erstwhile lawyer...
Can I cut you off?
First? Let's have another description.
I am not an ally of President Trump. I voted against him. I voted straight Democrat in the midterm elections. I disapprove of his immigration policies, his tax policies, many of his other policies. I am a defender of due process and civil liberties. I'm making exactly the same arguments that I made when Bill Clinton was impeached, exactly the same arguments I made when Hillary Clinton was being investigated. I'm not an ally of Donald Trump. I am an ally of civil liberties, human rights, and due process of law.
And you very graciously defended him.
I have defended him as I defended Hillary Clinton, and I have defended Bill Clinton against such charges, yeah.
Now, when the president's erstwhile lawyer he's caught lying to Congress and is now held accountable for it, it reflects pretty badly on the president, does it not?
Well, I think it reflects pretty badly on Mueller that almost all of his cases, right from the beginning, have been cases involving lying to authorities. In other words, he's found virtually nothing about crimes that existed before he became special prosecutor. Most of these crimes are crimes he provoked by pushing people into perjury traps. Virtually all of his indictments have been against people for lying, not against people for committing crimes relating to Russian
collusion. Oh, come on, Professor, you've been a lawyer for long enough to know that people lie when they've got something to cover up.
Of course, but the point is that when you have only the prosecution for the lying, not for any substantive crimes, it really does show a major weakness. In many parts of Europe, you can't even prosecute people.
You have no idea whatever as to whether he has
US
any other evidence or not. You've no idea. What you do know about is the cover-ups.
If he had it, well, it's not a cover-up for him necessarily. It's a cover-up for the people who have been indicted. These are people who have turned largely against the president. And so the question is, even if it were true, for example, that the president wanted to build a tower in Moscow, that's not a crime. The special prosecutor doesn't have a roving commission to identify a sin.
Where's your evidence?
It would be a political sin, perhaps.
Where is your evidence that
Mr. Mueller generally...
There's no evidence that Mr. Mueller is suggesting that the building of a Trump tower was illegal. There's nothing that he said that says that, and you're saying that's what he's...
Well, then why is he investigating it?
Well, because that is...
Why is he investigating it?
You have a man who gets elected president of the United States.
He doesn't have a...
You have a man who was elected president of the United States, who was already in fairly close cahoots with Moscow, who is now suspected of having had unacceptable contacts with Russia during the presidential campaign.
That's not a crime. That's simply not a crime. Those are political sins. And when you start having special prosecutors, special counsel appointed to uncover political sins rather than specific crimes, you're really interfering with the democratic process. Where is the crime? Having a building in Moscow is not a crime. Colluding with the Russians is not a crime.
Professor,
None of these are
extraordinary.
crimes. They may be political sins.
Are there any elected
politicians
in America who are charging that Mueller is making it all up?
I didn't say he's making it all up. I'm saying he's going well beyond his authority by investigating political sins rather than federal crimes. And the only federal crimes he's come up with so far are financial crimes that have nothing to do with the president, or lying, crimes that have occurred after he was appointed to be special counsel.
What evidence do you have that Mr. Mueller does not have?
Tell me.
What evidence do you have that Mr. Mueller does not have substantive evidence that the president had contacts which may well have been illegal?
Well, first of all, the burden of proof is on the prosecutor, not. Let me finish, please. You're sounding like a prosecutor. You're sounding like Mr. Mueller's assistant. First of all, if they have evidence, let's see what the evidence is. At the moment, the burden of proof is on somebody accusing others of crime. Second of all, having contact with the Russians is not a crime. The only thing that would be a crime is if the president or somebody in his campaign urged the Russians to hack the Democratic National Committee. Even using material that was the result of an Assange hack wouldn't be illegal. How do I know that? Because the Guardian has published material. Let me finish, please. The Guardian has published material. The New York Times, the Washington Post has published material stolen by people like Manning and Assange. That's not a crime. So let me ask you again, what's the crime?
Let me ask you, should Trump sack Mueller?
No, of course not. The investigation should continue.
Professor, thank you very much for joining us.
And the report should be issued, and the report should be issued together with a response by the defense team of Donald Trump.
Professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Donald Trump has arrived at the G20 meeting in Buenos Aires, but has been more distracted and agitated than usual by the sight this morning of his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, at a New York court. Michael Cohen had shared information with the special counsel Robert Mueller that he had lied to Congress about Donald Trump's Russian business interests not overlapping with his candidacy. In a plea deal, he admits he lied and says now that Trump's financial involvement in Russia continued well into the presidential campaign, something Trump has repeatedly denied. As if to put distance between himself and Vladimir Putin, Trump announced this afternoon there'd be no meeting between the two at the G20, ostensibly because of the Ukraine crisis. If it is proved that Trump made false claims in his recent written testimony to Mr. Mueller, it would be political dynamite. He once said he'd take a bullet for the president. But in court today, Donald Trump's one-time long-standing personal lawyer has possibly inflicted maximum damage on his former client. In an unexpected appearance before a federal judge in Manhattan this morning, Michael Cohen admitted misleading lawmakers about a Trump real estate project in Moscow. In other words, he lied to Congress. Today, a filing from Donald Trump's nemesis, special counsel Robert Mueller, revealed that whereas Cohen told Congress last summer that discussions about a possible plan to build a skyscraper hotel in the Russian capital ended in January 2016, they actually continued as late as approximately June 2016. And this, the criminal complaint said, Cohen well knew. June 2016 was the month of the legendary Trump Tower meeting between campaign officials and a Kremlin-connected lawyer, where material detrimental to Hillary Clinton was discussed. All this is an issue for Trump because it contradicts the president's insistence that he had no financial ties to Russia, an assertion he frequently made when questioned about his praise of Vladimir Putin and about his efforts to improve US-Russia relations. Up till now, Michael Cohen has been tangential to the Mueller investigation into Trump's links to Russia, but this plea agreement changes all that. Now he faces a fresh barrage from the president, who fired this parting shot as he headed off to Argentina.
He's a weak person and not a very smart person. What he's trying to do is end, and it's very simple. He's got himself a big prison sentence, and he's trying to get a much lesser prison sentence by making up a story.
Well, I'm joined now from San Diego by Harry Litman, a former U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania and former Department of Justice official. And Scotty Nell Hughes, a presenter on RT America, joins us from the G20 summit in Buenos Aires. Good evening to both of you. Harry Litman, first of all, do you think the timing of Michael Cohen's appearance was procedural or political?
The timing was procedural? I didn't pick that up. I'm sorry.
I was wondering if the timing was straightforwardly procedural, or was it actually tinged with politics?
I understand, yes. Well, it is possibly tinged with politics. We know that there's been a lot of activity involving Russian entities all week long, Manafort, Corsi, Stone, and these all follow the revelation of the Manafort plea agreements kind of demolishing. Mm-hmm. And so and also, of course, the responses to questions from Mueller by the special counsel. So it seems possible that he had them in hand before he unrolled an indictment that he really could have brought last week, the week before, or the week before that. So,
Scotty Nell Hughes, you are traveling with the president of the G20. You know, we heard before he left this morning, he made no mention of cancelling any meeting with Vladimir Putin. Then, hey presto, he gets to Buenos Aires and suddenly there is no meeting with Vladimir Putin. Tell me about the mood music. What's his demeanour been like today?
Well, that's the exact question right now. They had just released, the White House had just released President Trump's schedule. He had told reporters an hour before that the meeting was on. Yeah. And then 30 minutes later, you get this tweet that goes out. Even more interesting, the Kremlin found out about the canceled meeting via Donald Trump's tweet. So that shows something shook him up and made him decide that he needed to cancel this meeting.
But it's extraordinary, isn't it? Because there you have the leader of the Western world cancelling a meeting with Vladimir Putin because he's worried about what Michael Cohen said in court. How statesmanlike, do you think?
Well, that's the thing. That's not even about being a statesman. It's about being dangerous. If that's how we're going to start saying is that we're going to let events back at home that really have nothing to do. This is about Michael Cohen and Michael Cohen's potential going to jail and his lying to Congress, which he needs to be held accountable for. If that's going to affect international relations and diplomacy, then that's actually a very dangerous step that this has caused this past day.
Well, Harry Litman, I mean, can you assess the danger to Trump? Obviously, we need to see, we haven't seen any evidence from Michael Cohen that indeed Trump was, during his presidential campaign, still in discussions, or his people were still in discussions with Russia over this skyscraper or whatever. The fact of that isn't as bad as whether he lied to Mueller about it, which, if indeed he did, is dangerous for him, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's spurious to actually try to cordon this off from Trump himself. This was, as you said, the lies at a time when he was joined at the hip with Trump, and the lies were done because of his perception of Trump's interests. And remember, it was Trump himself during the campaign who was repeatedly insisting. So Trump himself and the campaign felt it was an imperative to let the American people think that falsely, that there were no ongoing dealings with Russia. And this was a considered two-page written document that was a tissue of lies, certainly coordinated with the Trump campaign itself. So the notion that this is just Cohen on a frolic and detour, I think, is untenable.
So tell me, in terms of the progress of the Mueller investigation, now Scotty Nell Hughes, do you think with the Democrats about to take the House, there's a bit more edge to what's going on?
Oh, well, there's no doubt. The Democrats have charged the second they become in power, they're just going to paper the White House with subpoenas. The question is, how does that resonate with the American public? Does that actually help the situation going on? And considering Mueller himself has not released, and so everybody's speculating what is in this report, it's very odd for anybody to be able to predict whether it's going to be for or it's actually going to, it's going to demonize Trump even more. I think the real question we have to decide is here, the timing of it. And the bigger issue right now, like you said, they were joined at the hip, but not just for the campaign. For the last 10 years of business. I think the more concerning part right now is how much more does the fix-it man for Donald Trump know about, besides the idea of doing business with Russia, but what other issues and skeletons can actually he disclose if it's going to save his own hide from going to jail?
But I want to come on a minute to talk a bit more what you're saying about the voters, what actually cuts with the voters. But before I do that, you have a theory that somehow, in a way, there's a pardon possibility going on here. What did you mean by that? Earlier, you told our researcher that you thought that what actually Cohen might be after was to Trump to pardon him. I explain the logic.
Yeah, I'm sorry, one more time. Explain the logic behind why this was happening.
No, why you think there's a possibility this is about a pardon?
Well, that was it. The whole thing in all of this is from the very beginning, Cohen was kind of actually looking for a pardon. In fact, that's what all of them, Manafort, all of them have been trying to do, was to get the attention. And that's usually how it's worked. These guys go into the spotlight and they make these big deals, and the president goes in and gives them the attention. You've seen it with senators. Now I guess you're going to see it with people looking for pardons. Now that friendship, the bromance is completely over between Cohen and Trump. So now Cohen's going, you know what? I know a lot of secrets about you, Donald Trump, and I'm going to start revealing them. So you better find some way to appease me and make me not be the fall guy for everything that's happened.
Harry Litman, we know that actually very little cuts through with his base. In fact, the only time it's really cut through with his base was he wasn't fast enough to go to California and get federal funds for the disaster, the fire disaster there. You know, what will his base be making of all this? Will they care one jot?
Right. It's been the big question for over a year, really. I mean, Mueller proceeds on what, by all accounts, is an extremely effective and comprehensive probe, but with each revelation seeming greater than the last and well beyond, for example, anything we learned in Watergate, you have a shrug of the shoulders, at least from the 42% that is Trump's knife edge and on which he's been able to maintain power, especially because to date the Republican Senate has shown no signs of abandoning him. There is a general sense, I think, in the country that yes, he may well have committed serious crimes, but nevertheless he has a firewall in the Senate, and it's not likely he'll be indicted in the courts. So, and the political, there are two really different sides here, the political and the legal, and they play out differently.
Thank you both very much indeed for joining us.